Hey, how's it going, everyone? Justin again. As always, thanks for watching my channel. Cheers to those of you that have your beers. I hope you're enjoying your work week so far. Today, I'm going to list off 6 reasons why I do not use service information when I'm doing a repair on a car as a mechanic. First things first, and I made a little tiny list of little annotations of the reasons, so I can try to stay on track. Because I know I get a little bit sideways and I forget about certain things. But at any rate, here we go. One of them, it takes too much time. It really does. To me, it seems like it takes too much time. Most of the time when I'm trying to take a component off of a car or a truck or whatever, I can look at it for, I don't know, let's say 2 to 5 minutes, and I already have an idea of what I need to take off, how I need to take it off, what tools I need to take it off, and chances are by the time I actually get started and get into it, the part's already out or almost out by the time you've already looked up the service information. So that's number one. It takes so much time, and time is money. And in this industry, whether you're working at a dealership, an independent shop, or as a lube tech, time is money. So there's a few things that you can do to try to minimize the amount of time it takes you to take something off, which we'll get into another video. But staying on track, trying to stay focused to the 6 reasons why I don't use service information, that's got to be number one. It just takes too much time. Second reason, unnecessary parts removal. A lot of the times, if you do go to service information will tell you, say, take this part off, take this part off, take this part off, in order to gain access to this part, remove refrigerant, remove coolant, remove oil, etc., etc. And to some degree, yeah, there's a few things in that service information that make sense, because if you need to take off part A to get to part B, then you need to take off part C, and etc., etc. I mean, I guess it does make sense to a certain degree, but there are ways that you can get around that without having to take off A and C to get B out. So I don't worry about it too much. Again, time is money, and there are certain components that you don't have to take off in order to actually get the job done. A lot of mechanics or technicians will refer to this as flat rating, just trying to get it done as quick as you possibly can with having to take off as little as you possibly can, and which we'll get into that here in a minute too. The third reason would be kinesthetic learning. I've always been a kinesthetic learner. I never learned anything out of a book that helped me. I have studied various things and read and read and read and tested and wrote down sentences and wrote down questions and wrote down answers, and I've done everything that most anybody else that's a hard learner, not the easy learners. Some people can get all the information they need out of reading anything and say, I know the answer. But when they get put in front of it and they have to put their hands on it, way different situation. They can't seem to do it. They get hung up. They're not sure what to do. Those people are not kinesthetic learners. They do not learn with their hands. They have to use their brain, and they have to read, and they have to get everything out of information before they can do it. And the chances of them actually remembering it for the long term are going to be slim to none, unless it's a repeat process, in which case you don't have to worry about remembering it so much. You already know what to do. And if you have an eidetic memory, a photographic memory, then you can actually look at something a couple of times, and before you know it, you already know what the torque spec is, you already know how to take it apart, what you're looking for, etc., and then it's done. Kinesthetic learning is where you're using your hands all the time, and you learn how to take something off, put it back together, and you know how to get around it without having to take other things off. So I think that's actually helped me a lot as a mechanic. It's like a puzzle to me. I might not know exactly what goes there right out the get-go. I didn't use a puzzle or a flow chart to get there, but eventually I found the piece that goes there, and I probably found it faster than it would have taken you to read about it. So that's my third reason. The fourth reason is that it won't tell you where certain bolts are located. So a lot of people look up service information. They're hoping it's going to give them the whole grand scheme of things. It's going to tell them exactly how to take it apart, how to put it back together, torque specs for everything. That's not the case. A lot of the times they'll give you torque specs for various things as long as you ask the right questions, i.e. intake manifold, how much to torque it, whether it's upper, lower, middle section, depending on what vehicle you're working on, exhaust manifold, whether it's, cylinder heads, etc. So don't get me wrong, torque specs are important. However, we'll get into that a little bit later. But however, the fact is that it gives you very limited information. It's not going to tell you where all the nuts and bolts are located in order to take that component off. And it certainly isn't going to tell you to take off every single piece to get to it. It's going to give you a generic flow, like take off the intake to gain access to this. Okay, well, before the intake, then you have the throttle body that's sometimes in the way. You have the fascia cover that's sometimes in the way, or the engine beauty cover that's in the way. You have vacuum hoses, PCV hoses. You have coolant hoses. You have other covers that are there in the way. Sometimes you might have to go into full service mode. Those of you that know what that is, that means you have to remove the whole entire bumper to gain access to it. So they won't tell you everything that you need to know. They'll just give you the meat and potatoes. Take this off to get to this, take this off to get to that, take this off to get to that, and then you should be able to have access to it. Should take you no time at all. Bullshit. Okay, I'm just telling you. Okay, I think it was the fifth reason. Most new cars don't have service information attached to them. A lot of the times when you have a newer car coming in, let's say it's 2017, 2018, maybe even having a 2019 that comes in for something, we're getting into 2019, right? But let's say 16 to 2018, somewhere in there, you have a new car coming in, you got to do a repair on it, and you go to look up the information on it, it's just not available. It gives you a torque spec, if it gives you anything at all, or it says see service information. Of course, service information is not there. It's drawing all data, and it says dealer specific tool, yada yada yada, to get to said component, etc. Or it says go back to over here to remove this component first to do this. So you're on there, and you could be on service information for a good half an hour to an hour trying to figure out where the starting point is and where the midpoint is, or the end point, So while you're wasting all this time on the computer trying to figure out how to do or how to take something off, by then I've already figured it out. I've got the component off and I'm already putting it back together. So that's got to be my fifth reason. My sixth reason is most bolts can be done and tightened by feel. So I'm not saying that you shouldn't torque certain things. Obviously, you need torque specs for certain things. And a lot of the times when I need a torque spec, I don't know all the service. I mean, I can kind of funnel my way through it to try to figure it out. But there are certain people within my shop that are actually a lot faster at finding service information than I am. So I lean on them for that. And I'm like, hey, I need a torque spec for the... Like if I'm doing an intake manifold gasket deal, I'll say I need the torque spec for the lower intake. I need it for the plenum. I need it for the, throttle body. Done. Give it to me. So they give it to me, and I look at it. I'm like, okay. So I'm looking at so many inch-pounds for the throttle body. I'm looking at so many inch-pounds for the upper plenum or whatever, and I'm looking at so many foot-pounds for the lower. So I'll do the lower, torque it down, and then I just kind of go by feel for the rest of it. And I've never had an issue. I've never had a comeback by going by feel. Once you've been in this industry long enough, and when I say long enough, I don't mean like a year, 2 years, etc. Once you've been in this industry long enough, you can kind of gauge how tight is too tight, how loose is too loose, because you're going to make mistakes. It's going to happen. But listen, the 3 years that I was over at Chrysler, within 2 to 3 years, I knew how to go by feel for the upper intakes, the lower intakes, things like that. The only time I ever actually used a torque spec was when it came down to like the cylinder head, the torque converter bolts, maybe the crankshaft bolt, stuff like that. Just, stuff that you needed to have things done. The axle nuts, things like that. So there were things that I used torque specs for. Other things, you can feel it out with your hand, or you can feel it with the gun. You know how much effort it took you to take it off with your cordless or your air pneumatic gun. You know how much effort it's going to take to put it back on with your cordless or your air pneumatic gun. So you can, for the most part, go by feel, go by sight. Everything else, not a big deal. Some people are going to disagree with me down in the comments. I understand. There's a lot of torque Nazis out there that are going to be like, torque everything. Oh, well, you do you. Not going to disagree with you. Things that I actually do use service information for. So I actually do go to service information for various torque specs, as I kind of explain here towards the end. Like, you know, cylinder head bolts, because let's face it, not every cylinder head bolt is going to be the exact same. Some of them you put them in dry, some of them you have to lube with oil, some of them are degree angle torque, some of them are just foot-pound torque. You need to know if it's a stretch bolt or not a stretch bolt, if you can reuse the bolt, if you can't reuse the bolt. Timing marks, you're going to want to know where timing is. So if you go to set timing, but the timing belt was the issue to begin with, you don't know if it jumped 1 or 2 teeth. So you have to figure out where the timing marks are supposed to be, and you want to hopefully try to get within that certain area, so that way hopefully the vehicle just runs the first time. You don't have to take everything back apart, which could be a setback, and we'll talk about setbacks in another video. But so I look up timing and stuff like that to make sure I'm precise. Specialty tools, because there are certain situations where I'm like, yeah. Chevy, for instance, some of their cars, you take the water pump out, it's in the gear set, and there's something with it where you have to have a special retainer tool that goes through the front in order to hold everything together timing wise, for you to remove the water pump from the back side, put the new water pump back in order to put the timing stuff back in. It's a nightmare. So there's specialty tools. There are other specialty tools when it comes to timing, when it comes to putting something together, when it comes to taking something apart, whether it's a diesel fuel injector or it's one of the tubes that it has to be taken out, or when you're taking out a fuel pump, there are specialty tools. So if you're looking at it and you're not quite sure how it comes apart, then service information will be extremely helpful to you, because it could tell you exactly, hey, this special tool. You might not know that special tool number, but you know that it requires a special tool, so you can go onto Amazon, type it in, say, I need a, what's the fuel pump removal tool for a Chrysler, yada, yada, yada. And you type it in, hit send, and it brings you up a whole laundry list of special tools for that product line. So use that for that. And worst case scenario, because there are certain times when you're like, I feel like the torque spec is, like, they'll give you a torque spec. Now this is worst case scenario. This is why I say I usually go by feel instead of going by torque spec. Some of this shit's so old, some of these bolts are stretched out, and sometimes you can see it, sometimes you can't. But you go by a torque spec, and you don't know how many times it's been removed and replaced, removed and replaced, removed and replaced, and then you go by a torque spec, and you feel like you get to that point where you're like, okay, I need to stop. If I go any tighter, this shit is gonna pull threads out, or it's gonna strip it around the bolt, or something bad is gonna happen. So you stop. Some people don't. They'll keep going until they get to that spec. They'll never get to that spec, and before you know it, you've pulled all the threads out, and now you need a helicoil, which runs into extra time. You need to pay extra time, use a special helicoil kit to rerun threads in, drill it out to a certain size, run the helicoil in, push it out, put the new bolt in, and now you gotta hope that everything torques down just fine. But the reason why that happened is because it went beyond its limit after being removed and replaced so many times. I've seen lower control arms that have been taken off, replaced, taken off, replaced, taken off, replaced, to the point where they just don't function anymore. And it's not that it's like you're taking it off wrong. You're taking it off the same way you've always taken it off. But when you have to remove and replace it so many different times, it wears down. It wears down that component. And next thing you know, the threads get chewed up, they're not fitting, they're pulling them off, it's stripping it out, whatever. And next thing you know, you need to sell another part. And that shit happens, especially on older vehicles. So those are the 6 things, plus a few other little things. The 6 reasons why I don't use service information, and then to follow it up towards the end, things that I actually do use service information for. I hope this video helped. I know I can go off on a tangent from time to time, but look, there are reasons why I don't use it, and there are certain times that I actually don't have a choice and I do have to use it. I'm like you guys for the most part, okay? I don't know everything. I'm not saying that I do, but if you take the time and you look at what the project is ahead of you, you'll learn more about that product line. You'll learn more about why you didn't have to take something off in order to put something back on. You'll be able to do it again the next time faster. And chances are, if you didn't look up service information the first time and you just dug right in and started doing what you needed to do, you would have been done already. That's my tidbit. I know there's going to be some disagreements down in the comments. That's okay. Feel free to do so. Thanks as always for watching. I hope you're enjoying your work week. We'll see you guys next time. Cheers and deuces.